And we have an incredibly qualified group there, but you're going to raise the bar to a whole other level too.
Yeah,
So that's really exciting.
Thank you.
I don't mean to predicate that the council doesn't have lots of grilling questions and might walk on. Other questions from Pat?
No, I'm just extremely appreciative of your willingness to continue to serve.
Thank you.
I'm absolutely amazed you didn't turn and run.
It's too much fun.
We're greatly appreciative
Yes.
of your work. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
Thank you.
And so with that, any questions or comments from the public in regards to the selection process for boards and commissions for the city? Okay, so seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion for the appointment of Patty Niket to the Public Safety Commission.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much.
Good to be back.
Yeah.
Item B, approval of the event permit for Waking Windows. More strangers.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, so this is the application for Waking Windows 2018. This will be the 8th year, is that right? The 8th year?
Correct, yes.
So, yeah, not too much of a stranger that we're looking at here with Allie Nagel. So we've received the event application for a 3-day arts and music festival that has been held for the last 7 years in Winooski and draws thousands of visitors to downtown business venues. The event will take place in a lot of the downtown businesses as well as the outdoor stages on Winooski Falls Way and in Rotary Park. The event sponsor requests the closure of Winooski Falls Way for Friday through Sunday, May 4th through 6th, use of Rotary Park, use of city property along Winooski Falls Way, use of the Terrace Park in front of VSAC, possible closure of the first block of West Canal Street, and potential use of Landry Park at the skate park. Staff has met with the event sponsors and discussed requirements and event needs with the event sponsors at our monthly event review meeting, November 15th. I said here that a list of conditions and requirements is included in the event application. I did not include it for you, but I do have a list of those. It's very similar to what we saw last year, so my apologies for that mistake. And staff recommends approval of the permit. I have Allie here to take any questions.
Welcome back, Allie.
Thank you. Great to be back.
So just in summary, any big changes people should, if we could summarize in a sentence or two, any big changes?
No, it's pretty much the same footprint as last year, besides the potential addition of the skate park for outside
Cool.
stuff. And then obviously there's a bunch of new businesses that will probably be involved as well.
Great,
But the footprint's gonna stay about the same.
awesome. Questions for Heather and Allie?
I mean, as an attendee who went last year was the first year I went to Waking Windows, and it was pretty mind-boggling. All the work that goes into pulling off such an amazing and high-quality event. When we talk about vibrancy here in Winooski, I can't think of a better example of that. And then got the opportunity to go to Waking Windows Portland a few months back. Nothing compared to Winooski.
Yeah.
It is not quite there yet.
It's fantastic, but Winooski just is the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for all of your work.
Yeah,
that's
thank
gone
you
into bringing
for
this here.
attending the festival and supporting it.
Questions or comments from the public? Yes?
I just wanted to say, first of all, a huge thank you to Allie and Waking Windows in general, because this is obviously such a great draw for our downtown, and that downtown Winooski is proud and grateful to you all for bringing this to us each year, and we're extremely supportive of this, and as has been evidenced over the last 6 years, they do an incredible job running this, and given that there have been virtually no problems, we would love to put our vote in as a yes.
Other questions, comments from the public? There are communities who work a really long time, invest a lot of money, and bend over backwards to try to get something like this into their community and town. And the fact that it's been fostered here is a real testament to both the professionalism and ingenuity of you guys on your side and of city staff too. And the fact that you guys together have worked in a way that's allowed this to grow in a way that's been sustainable and manageable is really, really impressive, and I think is one of the great feats that actually happens across the state, not just from our little community perspective. I mean, the fact that we really allow and manage an entire town turn into what it is, a beautiful circus, for a couple days is really takes a lot of coordination, work, and to do it professionally and well is really something. I'll say last year I had one negative exchange, and it was not reasonable. To be really blunt, it wasn't a person who was being reasonable, and I'm sure that that there are a few of those folks out there who are going to find a reason. But we do ask folks in this city to understand that part of being in this community means it's also going to be a community that supports vibrancy and supports things that are going to support the businesses that are here and make it an exciting place to live. So we do appreciate the residents who do have some level of impact on their lives and their willingness to accept that for a couple days as a result of something so great happening in town. So thanks for all your work. We're very appreciative. Excited to have you back.
Thanks, Seth. That's a great partnership. Couldn't do it without the city.
Yeah. And I owe you a quote. Okay. And so with
Luckily, that's on tape.
On the record, yes.
with that, I would entertain a motion for approval of the event permit for Waking Windows.
So moved.
Motion by Nicole, second by Brian Sweeney. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
See you next year.
Item C, approval of transportation alternative grant, Main Street revitalization.
So this is a request for approval of a grant application that I will, in interest of full disclosure, say has already been submitted for stormwater work as part of the Main Street project. So as Seth, the mayor, alluded earlier, we had a great meeting on Main Street with the public last week. And one of the things that came up is that this will be a very expensive project, and one of the only ways it will work is if we really maximize other funding sources into the project, so we are not relying solely on property taxpayers to fund it. So in the interest of that, we are working really aggressively to go after every funding source we can that could be applied to this project, and the Transportation Alternatives Grant through the state is certainly one of those. So this is an application for $300,000 specifically requesting stormwater work associated with the project. The other funders we have currently interested are specifically water and wastewater and streetscape focused. So this is an unmet need at this point. There will be a $75,000 grant match that if awarded, we can use other project funds to match. So at this point, we're not asking for any new dollars to match this. We also, as you may remember, got awarded one of these grants 2 years or a year and a half ago for pedestrian improvements that we've also received permission from the state to prioritize towards Main Street as well. 3 of those intersections were on Main Street. So again, this is kind of the attempt to piece together multiple funding sources to make a significant infrastructure improvement project work in the city.
Awesome.
Source of grant?
So it's the V-Trans Transportation Alternatives Grant, which I believe is federal funding.
Okay.
So we would need to match with local or other state dollars.
And I'm gonna ask that you call for discussion and vote, because it's an application for federal funds. We got that whole Hatch Act thing. So, if you're comfortable doing that, sir?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna recuse, because my day job is with the federal government, so.
Okay.
Federal government for mine.
The one that I actually can't read, I don't have my glasses.
So-
Any further questions from the board?
No.
Any from the public on this particular issue? Okay, I would accept a motion for approval of the Transportation Alternative Grant, Main Street Revitalization.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by and seconded by. All those in favor, say aye. Got it.
maybe I should pick up a petition. No. Sorry to throw that on you.
Yeah.
I didn't know this. Okay. We'll jump into item D, discussion of the master plan roadmap.
So I'm going to ask Paul Dreher to come up for this one as well. So the Planning Commission has been hard at work doing the initial work towards the development of an updated municipal master plan for the city. You've heard us talk about that before. The commission is at the point of being ready to ask other commissions to start working on master plan sections and chapters. So as you will start hearing about this through your commission work, and just because we hadn't updated you in a fair amount of time, we wanted to give you an update of where we were, a reminder for the public again on what a master plan is and why we go in this direction, provide a timeline, and additionally in your packet you see the chapter outline that the Planning Commission has developed. And you'll note that that chapter outline is aligned to the council's strategic vision areas. So Paul, if you could give a quick overview on kind of where we are and next steps.
Sure. So the Planning Commission has been engaged in what I called sort of expansive visioning, which was sort of collecting as much information as they could from within their ranks and also externally. They're at the point where they've come to a chapter, a list of chapters and subheadings or subtopics within that chapter. They also have a loose format, which is loose. The format is not. I think that they've sort of settled on not being a thick book that is something that sits on the shelf that is mostly unlooked at. They want to kind of do a dynamic, very graphic document that has sort of the themes of the four city vision woven in and out, and sort of in between, woven together. And where we are now is about to start, and you'll see on the schedule, scheduling pretty intensively cycles through the commissions and the partner organizations or partner groups, so that we'll start to see the commissions meeting with the Planning Commission on a almost 4-week basis. So 1 week we'll do one or two, next week we'll do the next, and cycle through them, so that we can first see what they offer and assign tasks, and then have regular updates and visits with them to kind of see, to get kind of a measure where they are. The plan is to finish by January 2018. I think we're in good shape to do that. I think we've been collecting photographs, collecting images, collecting input, and we will be doing some public outreach as well. But the Planning Commission, and I think under city management and my direction, is sort of acknowledging the full complement of planning or visioning we've done in the past through the form-based code project, through the transportation master plan, the energy plan, the economic development plan, so strategic plan. So I think we've done a ton of work as a city, and now it's really a matter of assembling that and putting it together.
January 2019.
19, yes, so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I have all these, between this project and the...
That seemed fairly aggressive when you said it, but.
Yeah, between this project and the Main Street project, I have dates sort of swimming in my head about when things are happening, and so.
Yeah, just reflecting on having heard the Planning Commission go through this, and the idea is that what they tasked Paul with is really coming up with more of a useful narrative that's accessible to the public too, in terms of a document, and something that really conveys a vision and does it effectively in an accessible way. And I think this is a really valuable way of looking at it, and a really interesting way. And I think too that it's a process that'll play out, and they'll have an opportunity to kind of see how it wonks together, and that's exciting too. The other thing that I want to acknowledges that the idea of this too is, and it's in the text here, is it allows us to use those other plans that we've created, like the transportation plan and, you know, even the resiliency plans, economic development plans, and use those as reference starting points that can be updated independently as the city goes on, so that we're in a constant state of updating things versus being in the situation where we are now, where the whole thing is outdated and way behind. I think referencing those documents versus trying to rewrite all of that into the plan is a really smart way of going about it, because it takes pressure off that plan of having to stand the test of time and uses those items that are frankly much easier to update and to reassess on a piecemeal basis. You know, so someday I can see the city getting to the point where it's, you know, has a rotating roster of, okay, it's time for us to really invest some time in updating this area and this area and this area, so that it's not this kind of all-inclusive process that we're having to undergo now that's really challenging. But you've done a great job of framing it up and putting together a concrete timeline and path, and very appreciative of that. So I think, not to speak for Mike O'Brien, Chair of the Planning Commission, but we had a meeting with Paul, and I think both of us left really excited about what was presented here. So that was good. Questions and concerns? Comments?
I was just wondering, this looks both familiar and exciting, you know, it's definitely hits on a lot of common themes. And I think the process that you've described makes sense. I'm interested in, and I know there's been a lot of events and outreach that's gone on as part of all these different planning processes. I'm curious to hear more about how we might ensure that folks who typically don't get involved in these types of processes are going to have their voices or perspectives, that those voices and perspectives are going to inform this, and whether you think that's already been accomplished, and if so how, or whether we might add to this list of commissions and partners some organizations that may have the relationships that we don't necessarily have as city government with members of our community that may not think to come to a Main Street revitalization meeting on a Wednesday night.
So I think that in general, you can always do more.
Yeah.
Public outreach is something that we can always do more of it. And we do have some, well, first of all, we're going to stream or have all the meetings filmed, so that we've shifted our TV time, our CCTV time from DRB, because we don't have that many DRB meetings, to the Planning Commission. So we'll have that on CCTV. We will also, at a couple intervals in this process, reach out to the community. I think we have tentatively planned with Ray and Heather what I would call it's going to be a public outreach meeting where we get all the commissions and we sort of do a cafe style seating where people from the public can rotate through the various little meetings that are happening, and then we'll have a report out at the end so that we can hear any other concerns that we're not addressing. And I think that as far as this list goes, or any of these things, that we think of it as a very much an evolving document. So we will always be looking for partners, and I'm sure that this list that's included here is not comprehensive. But I think the goal would be to, with the commission members and just doing their regular ambassador work, reaching out to the people that they communicate with, and then also through public outreach meetings, at least 2, in the upcoming year.
So just 2 additional things to add to that, to underline kind of what Paul is saying. Paul's done already some preliminary work reaching out to the school district and thinking about how we engage young people in this process, as well as we talked about it with the school board at our joint meeting this fall, thinking about, young people are really the ones who are going to most own and benefit from this plan, so how do we involve their voices early in it? And then Ray's also, our leadership team has done a fair amount of work developing our relationship with ALV and VRRP, and we've talked with them about this initiative as well, and thinking about how we best engage individuals or families or groups, or go to them in their regular meetings and opportunities to gather to solicit targeted input as well. So I think those are also processes that will happen that are not necessarily codified in necessarily the public official hearing processes, but voices will try and engage throughout the process.
Right. I think if you can, I think working with the school district is great, not just to connect with youth, but also a lot of families.
Yeah.
That's the point of contact. And there's a lot of events that happen up at the district where it'd be relatively easy to have a commission member or two there with like, we've got a couple quick questions for you. I think it's hard for people to commit, especially folks with young families, to commit to a 3-hour on a weeknight meeting. But if there's, a way to connect where they already are in a way that's not requiring a big time commitment, I think you can get a lot of interest and engagement in that way. So thank you.
So just additionally, I've also reached out to AARP and have verbal commitment from them that they'll help with sort of they have a huge reach, and they love projects like this, and so Kelly Stoddard Poor has committed to help with their machine, basically, for lack of a better word, to help reach the community members that may or may not have access to these kinds of events or discussions.
Thanks.
Awesome.
And I think from the messaging standpoint, something we've brought up a number of times here is it's about starting to, I'll say a frustration of mine through the years is we have been building up to this, and we have been taking steps towards this and creating the vision and gleaning that from the public, right, through a number of different processes. One place where I do think bluntly we failed is making sure it's clearly communicated that all those things are being tied together in a cohesive way, so that when they're answering surveys, when they're attending meetings, they know that that's all feeding into this planning process. We verbalize it a great deal, but it's something that, and this predates everybody sitting up at the table over there, and frankly even a lot of us. But I think that's that thread that we as counselors too need to really be proactive about talking about in the community, is that we have done a lot of that legwork and had a lot of input and a lot of opportunities for people to participate, and there'll still be more, but all of that has kind of funneled into this, and that's exciting because it reminds folks that they didn't participate in those things for naught. Because if you ask people what they want enough times, eventually they start saying, okay, I'm kind of tired of answering that question. What are you doing? Like what's happening? I've talked about that here before.
So the last thing I'll say, and I find it really amazing. So as you all, I think, know, I was on the form-based code team. So I've been involved with Winooski for some period of time. And the consistency of the message that these chapters actually reflect a very consistent message from that process to transportation master plan process to the strategic development. So I feel quite confident that we're kind of hitting the notes. And every time we do some outreach or we open it up so that it's an open discussion, we end up back sort of at this similar list. So I think we're hitting the notes at this point, and not to say that these are all of them, but I think we're cast a broad enough net that we're going to capture a great deal of the sentiment that the city, and it's pretty amazing, to be honest with you, from coming in from the outside, how consistent, how like the message is really clear, and it seems like a lot of things are moving in the right direction, in the same direction, and it's being reflected in this kind of process.
Other questions or comments on the roadmap? The master plan roadmap?
No.
Questions or comments from the public? So, seeing and hearing none, that's a discussion item, so thank you very much, Paul. I think the
Thank you.
feedback was what it was. So I know we don't have enough time to do the city manager's budget presentation. With that being said, I think we probably could fit volunteer handbook in 7 minutes. Is that feasible? Okay.
So I'm turning this over to Ray, who's done the yeoman's amount of work on this. His team has done the yeoman's amount of work on this with Julie from Human Resources as well.
Great. So I think, hello, first of all. Document in front of you here, it represents, as Justice said, a lot of work from a lot of folks. So in particular, tips of the cap to Paul Sarn, who is now our communications coordinator, but who was a Vista for the last 2 years, working on not only communications, but volunteer work. And also Afea Lambert-Hartford, who is our current Vista, who sort of helped take all these pieces, get them into the same document, and take this across the finish line. A lot of work with Julie as well, who's been really a great resource for us, helped a lot with cross-referencing this document with our personnel manual. I think one of the pieces we really want to do as we professionalize our volunteer approach is to look at our volunteers through a very similar lens as to the way we look at our personnel, and hold folks to similar standards. And I think really, again, coming in here, I have to say I'm a pretty relaxed dude, and there is not a lot that keeps me up at night about my job. This is one area where I've stressed right out. And coming in here without a system for screening volunteers, knowing who's where, when, with who, was a real concern. So I think, again, this document represents the codification and sort of consolidation of a lot of work over the last 5 years to really move this volunteer process and management system into a more professional vein. Legal review was done as well, so we got the lawyers look at this. And one other exciting piece just to note is that we are working pretty closely with the Justice Center. That's a group that is very volunteer dependent and for a long time has kind of operated with their volunteer stuff fairly separately. But we did a lot of work with Eli and Michelle to make sure that this document can be applied not only to community service volunteers, but across the city, and in particular with the Justice Center. So pretty exciting to be here and getting this in front of you for approval, and I think represents a pretty big step for us overall. So I don't know, that's my intro.
I thought it was accessible, and I think people can read this and understand it, which is great too. It was written in a way that it's nice to know the legal has touched it.
Yes.
Okay. Questions, concerns? One thing I wondered is the, do we get an emergency contact for people?
So we do have a volunteer application that does have that information.
That does
on it,
have,
yeah.
nice,
Yeah.
yeah. Good. Yeah, great job, and great, I can imagine that not having any guardrails on this can make it a little nerve-wracking. Julie, thank you very much for your work, too.
Yeah.
So do we anticipate like handing that out with every
Precisely. Yeah,
person
making
that
it
comes
available
aboard,
on
or
the
are we just
website.
gonna hand it out with the application?
I think ideally what we'll do is, I think dependent on the volunteer position, either hand this out as folks are coming in the door, or at the very least make them aware of it on the website. And I think, to Seth's point, this is designed to be pretty accessible and to be used as a tool with volunteers coming in. This was not supposed to be particularly wonky or like hard to read. So again, I think as we have volunteers coming in, it gives us a chance to hand this to them and say, read through this, sign off and say you've read through it. If you have questions, let's talk about it. But again, I think it brings everybody kind of onto the same page in terms of expectations, which is a big deal.
Other questions, comments for Ray on the volunteer handbook?
No, I appreciate this so much coming from a volunteer management background, knowing how important this can be, especially for a municipality and some of the liability around engaging volunteers there. So thank you for all the work that went into this.
Yep.
Questions, comments from council? Any questions or comments from the public? Great. So seeing and hearing none, this item is actually up for discussion. So I'm assuming it'll be back next time for final approval.
Correct.
Great. Thank you for your work on this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Happy to do it.
And let's be aggressive. We've got a couple minutes. So if you're okay staying in that seat and rocking and rolling with the community service fees, that'd be great.
Yes, let me just quickly grab my
Sure.
paper that I left over there.
Right, do you need it?
Perfect. So largely, I guess what I'd say is an administrative item that is stemming from language in the charter. So charter establishes that all fees need to be set in ordinance. When we redid the ordinances back in June, I believe it was, within that chapter, there's language that says for community services fees that are not otherwise codified in ordinance, we will come back periodically to get resolution approval of fees. So this is a set of fees that reflects things that are not already codified in the ordinance. So for instance, the Thrive program, which is fees based on the state subsidy rate, is in ordinance, already established, already approved by council. So this is by no means a comprehensive set of the fees we're charging. These are just the ones that either we didn't want to set a pin down in an ordinance or that have come up since that point. I also expect we're working now on a quarterly basis to do our program planning, so I suspect you will see us sooner rather than later for sort of the next iteration of this. But this is kind of, again, in response to language that, from a legal perspective, we were kind of held to through the charter and through the ordinance.
Sure.
So.
Okay, we gotta tell us what Weasels is.
So the Weasels are the break-off tickets that they do as part of bingo.
Okay.
And the bingo is used as a fundraiser for senior programs.
Sure.
Weasels and dabbers.
Dabbers, yeah, is the other one.
Weasels and dabbers.
That's how you mark your bingo
Senior
ticket.
It is the most exciting place in the community.
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't have any immediate reactions, thoughts, or comments, and
No.
I'd seen the fees seem reasonable from just cursory glance, and uneducated perspective. But I don't know if there's anybody that had any other thoughts or questions or comments. Trusting that you guys vetted those.
Yep. Yep.
Questions, comments, concerns from the public? Good. So seeing and hearing none, this is an item up for approval tonight. I entertain a motion for approval of the community services fee schedule resolution as presented.
So move.
Motion by Brian Sweeney, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Okay, we now are hitting thank you, Ray.
Yeah.
Thanks for working both those items. We are now hitting 6:45. We have a scheduled public hearing in regards to an animal bite, and we will now open that public hearing. And I will turn things over to Jesse and
Sure.
whoever you'd like to come up.
So I'll bring John up as well, and Stephanie, actually, if you want to come up. And I don't know if there are others who are here. So just as a little bit of table setting, and then I'll turn it back to you for the hearing. So we received, late last week, we received a request for a hearing under Chapter 3 of our municipal ordinances. There had been a dog bite. Stephanie, who is our animal control officer, and John have been working closely with both the dog owner and the victim since the event had happened, which I believe was November 21st. And we're negotiating the relationships, understanding the public health exposure. This is not a rabies case, and tried to come to some resolution, and there was the request for the public hearing in front of you. I think it's safe to say, although eventually I will have John and Stephanie speak directly, that I think that there is some shared interest among parties that a decision on your part to direct the owner to muzzle and leash the dog at all times would be acceptable. That is only something that your body can dictate. We administratively do not have the power to dictate that. So if you want to do a quick overview, or
Yeah,
Stephanie?
so evening. My role is just to kind of sit through the hearing and make sure all parties are heard and the parties are here, meaning both the dog bite victim now and the dog owner. Of course, Steph, who did the investigation. So Again, the dog owner is at 24 East Spring. The victim's from 34 East Spring. The dog in question is a Great Dane mix named Thor. Has a clean bill of health at this point. Is, as of today, registered, vaccinated, all that sort of thing with the city. So some work has been done since the bite. The bite did happen on the 21st. And I'm gonna just allow Steph to kind of do her summary, and then I think we hear from the victim and then the dog owner, or however you want to proceed through the hearing.
Yeah, sure. A summary from you would be great. Thank you for your work, first of all.
So the bite actually occurred on the 19th. Sorry, but we did not get the report until the 21st is what happened. So typically the hospital, when somebody goes to the hospital or even to their doctor, they're supposed to contact the police department to let us know about an animal bite, animal bites, animal scratches. And so the victim was waiting for us to give her a call, and they were like, so they ended up calling us because we hadn't reached out to them, which was because we didn't get anything from the hospital. So that's what the 21st date is. So I did my initial investigation, I met with the victim, I got a photograph of the injury, I viewed the injury, she went over the circumstances, she advised that she was walking down the sidewalk. In my report it says Kenny Drugs, but one of the ladies who works in the town corrected me and said, that's funny because we don't have a Kenny Drugs. So a Rite Aid is what I meant. So I apologize about that. So she was walking down the street and he came off the yard and just bit her in the upper thigh, right underneath, I believe it was the left, so the upper thigh on the left side. I went over and talked to the dog owner. He was very receptive. He said that, when it happened, he had even brought the victims to the hospital so she could get checked out. The dog, I did meet the dog that night. Owner requested that he said that he already had a muzzle for him, requested that he put a muzzle on him. And I said that would, that'd be fine. He said he'd want to be on the safe side since he had something happen on Sunday, and I said that's understandable. So I put the muzzle on, I met the dog, and he was licking me through the muzzle. So he acted very friendly in the house. And the biggest concern is outside of the home, and even from what the owner is working with a trainer, and it's strangers and people outside of the home is where there's a known problem. So we did the 10-day quarantine. He was not up to date on his rabies vaccine. Anthony called I told him he needed to call that next morning because when I went to talk to Anthony and Christine, it was 6, 7 o'clock at night. So I advised he needed to call and make an appointment for the end of the 10-day quarantine to get the dog vaccinated, which he did. He went to that appointment, which was the 29th, because the 10 days, they can't be vaccinated within those 10 days. So he went as soon as those 10 days were up on the 29th and got the dog vaccinated. He called me right after he left the appointment. And I subsequently called the vet and asked them to forward me that new rabies certificate, which I have. I got clearance on the 29th that the dog was healthy from the vet, but I went on Thursday morning and laid eyes on the dog and saw the dog myself, and he was still in good health.
And previous issues, any history?
There is a previous history. I'm partially, so this was divulged to me by the owner, and as well as, Christine had mentioned that she had heard that there was another incident. So the other incidents, I'm also privy to them because they happened. I also covered Colchester.
Yeah.
So they occurred in the town of Colchester. There was no break in skin during these other incidences, and they were also, the victims never reported them.
Okay.
And it was reported 3 weeks later by the victim's wife, and her husband never called us. So that was the situation that happened over the summer at a softball game. And he was, the softball league determined that the dog could no longer come to the field.
Okay.
And I remember Anthony being, you know, receptive with, you know, and easy to talk, you know, we got all the information I needed back then. It was the complaint, it wasn't as forthcoming.
Right. Any questions for Stephanie?
Not at this point, though.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that was thorough, and we appreciate the detailed write-up, dates, details. Great job. I think now we would offer an opportunity. It's by no means compelled, but there's an opportunity for the victim first, I think, to say anything that they might feel like they don't know who's who out there, but yeah, you're welcome to speak. And if you can come up here, if we can make maybe slide another chair up or. Good evening.
Good evening. Well, like you guys said, these guys covered it pretty well. My main concern is I have grandchildren. I walk down that street every day, and now I'm afraid. I really am afraid. Now I take the long way, but it can happen. It can happen to anybody. There was one time my mailman actually just spoke to me about an incident that happened to him. Anthony's girlfriend had the dog, and she was having a heck of a time holding him back. She had to holler for Anthony to get the dog. I guess all I want is the dog to have a muzzle on if he's outside, on a leash at all times. It's scary. It really is scary.
Questions?
So the dog was not on a leash
No.
or was just outside?
Anthony had spoke to me and told me he had to let the dog go out, go to the bathroom, and he usually comes right back in.
Mm-hmm.
But I was coming on the sidewalk, and
It's not a fenced
No.
So
enclosure?
the dog was off its property.
yes.
Okay.
Other questions? Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
And we'll now offer an opportunity if the owner would like to have any comments made publicly.
Yeah.
Pleasure to meet you. Thanks for having us. Pretty much same thing. They pretty much nailed it. Really, that was it. I'd open the door to, normally it just kind of goes around to where there is a yard area in the back. I kind of turned around just to close the door, and it was in that short amount of time that happened. I mean, it happened regardless. It's not really an excuse or anything, but it was kind of it. Normally he's a really good dog, but he is from a rescue, and I've been working with a trainer to try to alleviate his behavior and work on it. He's great with people that he's familiar with. Strange people, it's a little rough with.
So you are working with a trainer as
Yeah.
well?
Yep.
And was that taking place before this issue occurred as well?
We've had multiple sessions prior to this incident. Yeah.
Okay. And is there anything about your residents that makes you feel like there are obstacles to maintaining future control too?
I don't think so. No, I just have to make sure that before the front door is open, that leash is on him, anything like that. So it's really, I don't really see any obstacles though.
Yeah.
Are you living at an owned property or is it a rental?
It's a
property?
rental.
It's a rental property, so fencing might not be
Right.
optimal. Right.
Other questions, comments for Anthony? Yeah, I'll just say these cases can be really frustrating when you sit in this chair, to be blunt, because we understand that sometimes animals do things that are unpredictable or uncontrolled. The fact that there's a couple incidences in here is challenging, and quite frankly, when these cases come up, I look at the people who are sitting in that chair, as an animal owner too, and this isn't being biased on it. It's just there's repercussions and results if things aren't done correctly
Right.
with pet ownership, and that's a responsibility that people sign up for. And from a public safety standpoint, we're then responsible for ensuring that people are doing a good job with that and following the rules that exist.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, so, and I just want to make that really clear. We're going to talk about whatever result's going to come out of it. I don't say that to make you feel badly. I'm sure you do already, and I'm appreciative of that.
Yeah.
It's just, I think that's a really important delineation, that most of the time I find when we're making these decisions, we're making the decisions about the people in the situation, rather than the actual animal itself.
Right.
And I only say that because I hope it inspires, whatever the result may be, that's really focused on and worked hard on, so that we don't have to have another hearing later
Absolutely.
that has a different outcome. So, jumping off that soapbox now. Any questions or comments for Tony? Anthony? Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so in terms of potential action, I think thank you very much for providing the code. So we're referencing Chapter 3 and what the options and what happens in the case of a pet or a wolf hybrid biting a victim without provocation. And what we have in that section is shall make order for the protection of persons, facts, and circumstance the case may require, including without limitation, that domestic pet or hybrid wolf be disposed of in a humane way, muzzled, chained, or confined. The order shall be sent by certified mail return receipt requested. So, any other comments other than that chapter in terms of potential options and resolutions?
I think that's your scope.
Great.
And I just want to, leashes are already required,
Yeah.
right? So we don't need to take action requiring a leash, or do we, if it's on their property? I'm just,
So I would reaffirm it, and I would recommend you reaffirm it,
okay,
that they follow the current ordinance, that it be leashed.
Yeah.
I'm just giving an example, is in a fenced, secured yard and or muzzled. Those are, you have some room in there to.
Yeah, what I would akin it to is if and I know this is a kind of harsh sounding, but it's almost like somebody being released with conditions. You're reinstating, yeah, of course illegal things are illegal, but if you do this, it triggers a whole different process, because this isn't the first issue and instance. It sets the expectations much more clearly that as part of this release, as part of us not taking additional stricter action, that this will be followed through.
yep.
So Steph brings up a good point. We don't enforce the leash law on their own property.
So once the dog leaves the property, like when he went onto the sidewalk, it was a violation.
Yeah.
So he could, so yes, in the city, every dog has to be leashed, but we just don't enforce that on their property. So somebody could go out with their chihuahua in their front yard, let them go potty, come back inside, which was what was happening,
Right,
and which was totally legal.
right.
So the concern is that he was doing something legal
And-
that ended up being
Problem
illegal.
is the dog's not,
Shall be confined to
Uncontrolled.
his or her space.
right.
Or land, leashed and or muzzled outside of that area.
And in opening comments, it sounds like there's been a discussion about parties being satisfied at this point in time, generally with a muzzle and leash order.
Yes.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what I
think,
understand.
in conversations just with Anthony, not sure if he could get here for the hearing. I mean, we've talked, and I think the recommendation is that it be confined to its space, the owner's space that they have access to, and or muzzled and leashed outside of that area.
So that's not only the agreement on the parties, but also the professional recommendation we have sitting up here too. As
From
best as
public safety, I think that's.
Yeah.
So I just want to be clear, when you say confined to the property, is that the internal? I mean, because the issue, if the issue is the dog is let out to go into the yard, is the recommendation that that the dog be leashed anytime it leaves the interior of the house, of the apartment.
So,
Unless there's a fence,
so my intent was that it be confined to the space that they control as renters. I'm not gonna say it's the whole property.
Mm-hmm.
That may be a fence, it may be a lead, that dog cannot leave that space.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have access to the sidewalk, it doesn't have access to free run outside of the space that they control as renters.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a fenced-in space on the property?
There's, in the backyard, there's partially fenced in area and kind of shrubbery, I guess, on the other side. Normally when we go out, we're gonna go around to the back, and that's where we go, anytime we go out at home. But it's not completely fenced in, it's 2 out of 3 sides.
And I don't, just really quick, sorry, I think that there hasn't been cause to show that he can't be necessarily off leash behind a fence, a 4-foot fence or higher.
Right.
Like if their front porch has maybe a 2-foot little fence to it, a little gate to it or whatever, that he could easily jump over. But there's no cause to show that he has jumped over or would jump over a 4-foot fence. So if he was something like a dog park or, I don't know how, he doesn't do good with strangers, so it's not really the ideal place to go, but or if his friend has a fenced-in backyard, as long as it's 4 feet or higher, I don't see that as being an issue, unless it were to obviously become an issue. But in their situation that they're in right now, the dog should not be, just, let's go outside, open up the door, let's go outside.
Okay, thoughts around proposal for muzzle leash?
I just have a procedural question, and having not gone through this process before, and also not being somebody who is an expert in, animal behavior, is there an opportunity to revisit this down the road if it, let's say, 2 years after working with a dog behavioralist, or would there be the opportunity to come back and request changes?
Yeah, I think it would be up to you. I don't think there's any procedure to remove an order. That's something we'd have to investigate. We don't do this very often as a city. So this is all geared towards doing an order. There's not a lot of provisions here to release them.
It's a good process question. I think probably the owner would need to petition that.
Yeah. Improves it.
That would be that would just be my gut on the procedure.
And then I think one of the, just understanding this in general, especially for the folks at home, that procedural double checking that this is the recommendation of staff professionals and has been reached by agreement of both the owner and the victim. So it's kind of all 3 of those bases covered in this potential outcome.
I think that's what's been represented tonight.
And I don't want to speak for the folks, but
See head shaking.
I think after talking to the victim and the dog owner and our conversations, I think that's a fair statement.
Any other questions, concerns from council? It's a public hearing. Any questions on process from the public? Process-oriented questions on the hearing? Okay. I guess I'll just say, I'm certainly amenable to going with that route, and I'll ask for a motion in a few moments. I think, just want to reiterate, it sounds like you're trying to do a good thing in rescuing a dog and trying to do the right thing. So hopefully this is, an opportunity for that to continue and it be a successful relationship both for you and the community. And that you are both happy, healthy, and thriving in the future, and that your neighbors also feel very comfortable that the issue's been addressed in a responsible way. So, should that be the decision?
One last question, sorry.
Yep.
Is the dog now licensed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do appreciate also your working with a behavioralist or a trainer ahead of time.
His name is Wyatt Bright. Wyatt Bright, yeah. He's done great so far. There's more to go.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion from council in regards to a proposal for action regarding the antibody issue we have before us.
So how do we need to state this?
So the recommendation standing from staff and that was spoken to by both parties was that the dog be muzzled when outside of the home in an uncontrolled area, and also be leashed and not be allowed to be free on streets. Is that equate for it?
Public
Okay.
spaces, yeah.
Yep. So it's asking that any time the dog really leaves the premise, in this case, unless it's in a newly constructed fenced-rated area that doesn't exist, that dog be muzzled and leashed.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Nicole, second by Brian. Any further questions, concerns, or discussion? Hearing, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries. Stephanie, thank you very much for all of your work. We appreciate it. We unfortunately do not get to see you unless something goes wrong, which is too bad. We should have you in for cake once a year. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Okay. We'll circle back to our regular agenda. We have up next discussion of FY19 with the city manager's FY19 budget presentation.
Brian Corrigan was my witness that the technology was working earlier. We'll see how it goes now.
It's warming up.
So before you, on your tables, are budget books that look like this. And in that budget book, you have this presentation, as well as a narrative memo from me outlining the proposal in front of you. You have overview summaries from each of the departments about what they're putting before you, and you have the roll-up budgets for all of the budgets we'll talk about through this budget season. And this document is also on the website, so if there are members of the public who are interested in digging into this, they can go to the city's webpage, City Initiatives, City Budget, FY19 Proposed Budget, and the full document is there. So tonight I'm going to run through this presentation. The goal tonight really is to hear this city manager's proposed budget presentation, and then over the upcoming weeks you will hear individual presentations from all the departments. If you have comments or questions tonight that you would like either answers to tonight or more information as we go through this process, we're of course willing to take that feedback and integrate it into our budget presentations over time. So just for tonight, we're going to be talking about the process to date and the goals established. I'm going to give you an overview of the budgets that are recommendations before you, some more overview of what's actually in those, and then what to expect over the next couple of months. So just a reminder of where we've been and where we're going. So we've already had 2 budget discussions so far this year. We had one on September 18th where we talked about the process, and just for table setting, we are doing this slightly different this year than we have in past years, in that we are looking at no, I do not want to change the color scheme. We are looking at all the funds at once, the general fund and all the enterprise funds and special revenue funds, with the belief that that will give you a full picture of the complete finances of the city. We had a discussion on October 2nd about the goals of the budget and what you were hoping to receive from us. Tonight, December 4th, you're hearing my budget presentation, and then each of the department budget presentations following from there, and what funds we'll be talking about on each evening. So in terms of goals, the goals that we heard from you, while no vote was taken, this is what we heard from you that the leadership team used to build this budget. So we heard that you were interested in a level tax rate budget that had no impact on the tax rate. and we're willing to think about an increase that would not exceed cost of living. So you are not interested in any budget presentation that was going to lead to an over cost of living increase. Currently, that's 2%. It was 2.7% in.
You have to let that go.
Sorry?
We have to change the color scheme.
Well, what would the impact be to the general fund? Is there any cost savings?
You asked us to look at, specifically to focus on the strategic vision areas and any ads that were targeted specifically at grand list growth and economic development. Asked us to look at how we manage resources and the people doing the work. And specifically, as we've talked about earlier tonight already, focus on all the planning efforts we've done to date and how to forward them forward to action. So budgets are, as you all know and have talked about already, are more than just the dollar amounts. They're really about dedicating the resources towards the priorities of the city and the accomplishments that we are hoping to glean from staff and our team. So here you see your strategic vision areas and successes that we feel like we've already had in FY18 or are working to accomplish in FY18. Okay, give me a minute and see if I can get rid of this alt. Don't show this message again. There we go. So you, of course, are very familiar with these accomplishments, and again, they're in your packet for reference. Similarly, for FY19, these are goals we hope to achieve and priorities we hope to achieve with the budgets as presented. With a big note that our recommendation will be, once we move beyond town meeting day, that the council and staff revisit the specific goals associated with each strategic vision area. So the assumptions and challenges we had walking into this budget, and I should say at this point that this was a complete team effort from start to finish. The leadership team spent several meetings together going over these financial realities, going over ideas for cuts, and putting together these recommended budgets. So these are our assumptions. Just as a reminder, a penny on the tax rate raises about $50,000 in Winooski. So with this budget, we are assuming a 2.2% COLA in FY19. If you probably remember in FY18, we budgeted a 1.5% COLA, and it actually came in at 2.7%. That's very typical. We are budgeting 6 months to 18 months out, so we are working with unknown numbers. There's two ramifications of that. One, it is a higher assumption than we've made in past years. To need to acknowledge, as we built the budget from the ground up, that because we had only budgeted 1.5% in FY19 and it was actually 2.7, we entered FY18 with a $40,000 deficit. Mm-hmm. So we had to grow out of that with this budget to just get to zero. Additionally, the FY18 budget was built without projections for the recently settled union contracts, so that's something else we had to build our way out of. Health insurance is projected to go up about 10%, 11% this year. We're projecting with this budget a very modest grand list growth rate of 0.8% outside the TIF district and 1% within the TIF district. So that's approximately in the non-TIF grand list, a $32,000 add to the revenue property tax line this year. So when you think about all those things that we were growing out of with only $32,000 new dollars. Having said that, the FY18 or FY17 grand list that was for funded FY18 came in lower than we budgeted as well. So the actual impact of that modest projection is only $17,000 over what we collected this year. The result of all of this is, as the department heads presented their level services budget to myself and Angela, and we looked at these assumptions, we actually had to cut out about $350,000 out of the budget to meet the level tax rate budget. So that's what we kind of walked into this process with. So what did we include in this proposal? So these are our value judgments. You have the data in front of you. We can talk about this over the next couple of weeks and month and a half. But these are some things that we did build into the proposed budget. We maintained the current staffing that we've built up over the last couple of years for the strategic vision areas, specifically the Community and Economic Development Officer, the Communications Officer, and the full-time Planning and Zoning Manager. We feel like those positions are really important to forward the shared strategic vision. At the recommendation of the auditors, we are moving the O'Brien Community Center into the general fund, or recommending moving it into the general fund this year. We are also recommending that we hold the general fund harmless in this first year in doing that, which means we will be looking for about $30,000 in reserves to offset, one, the lost revenue to the general fund, and the operating deficit currently in the SEC budget. Historically, we have had, in recent history, we have had a volunteer grand juror, or grand jurors, that are no longer able to do that. So to meet our legal requirements, we are building in a very small budget to bring on a contracted staff person to do that work. We are recommending the addition of a 0.3 FTE accounting clerk for $10,000 a year. We have a very small accounting department, i.e. Angela. And as we think about, this is actually a strategic ad relevant to the strategic vision. As we think about planning for the TIF expiration, planning for some large federal grants, and really building up our capacity to make sure our financial house is in order, a very small addition of about 12 hours a week will free up some of Angela's time from doing kind of some of the mundane processing pieces, so she can focus on those larger financial strategic thinking pieces. The other very significant decision we made going into this budget was to prioritize a fire apparatus. So we have 2 fire trucks in the city right now. One is 24 years old and one is 26 years old. It is a very real possibility that if we don't replace one of those this fiscal year, we could not be able to respond to calls. So we have prioritized the purchase of a new fire truck in FY19 over other capital investments, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. We have budgeted an additional $11,000 for technology improvements. We've talked about that before. This is an add to our software services line and would enable us to move to a cloud solution and an improved email solution. Right now we are making staffing decisions based on the number of email accounts we have, which is really not a very effective way to go. The other thing built into this budget is a salary contingency line for non-union staff. So we have 2 contracts recently settled with the AFSCME union, who represents Public Works, and the FOP that represents our police department, that looked at comparable salaries across communities. We have not done that work for our non-union staff yet, but intend to in the next 6 months, so wanted to build in a contingency line to rectify some of those places where we're off kilter. I think this is really important for recruitment and retention moving forward, and we've seen some of the difficulties we've had because some of those salary, we're not competitive on some of our benefit lines in some non-union positions. So these are proposals that are included in the budget proposals you see in front of you. So what do you see in front of you? So you will see, as you look through the roll-up budgets, 2 different budgets proposed. One is a level tax rate budget, has no impact on the tax rate, is the result of us cutting $314,000 as well as some other staffing assumptions out of the level services budget. Then we have what we're calling a leadership proposal budget, which meets the council's goals and would result in a 1.9% increase in the tax rate. Each roll-up budget you see will have these headings along the top of them. So you have what was budgeted in FY17, what we actually spent in FY17, the FY18 data thus far into the fiscal year, then the 19 level tax rate budget, and the 19 leadership proposal budget. So that should be uniform across roll-ups. So what's actually in these budgets? So this is the specific detail of how we got to those 2 proposals. So this first slide presents some revenue assumption changes we made. As we talked about earlier, we adopted a new fee structure ordinance earlier in the year. As a result of those, that new fee structure, as well as the growth we are seeing, we estimate that these these revenue lines that you see before you will increase from last year. This is the hard slide. This is the slide about reductions that we are proposing or recommending to our staff and benefits lines throughout our budget in all of the detail. This allows you to see where we're making those value calls and potentially cut or add as you see fit over the next couple of conversations. So just to highlight some of the assumptions we've made, we have cut out all overtime lines for anything not police or public works and level funded those two from this year. We have proposed a reduction in the office manager position with the level tax rate budget. We have proposed pulling our officer back from Cusi. We have proposed eliminating the Community Justice Center match, which is the reparative board manager. We have proposed eliminating the Public Works Director position with the level tax rate budget. That's accompanied, as you'll see, by the need to invest in other public works staff to make that even potentially feasible. And then we've reduced the library circulation assistant and then moved other salaries to other funds where we believe there is some logic based on job description. In the leadership proposal budget, we have put back in some hours associated with the office manager. We've put back in the community justice match, the public works position, and the library circulation assistant. Does that make sense? Does this math on this column make sense? Yeah. There's also in your budget book at the end of this presentation a full spreadsheet of all of this data with the accompanying tax rate impact and impact to the property taxpayer, so you can look at it line by line. This slide presents the other reductions we made in other non-salary and benefit expense lines. So a few to call out here. We are recommending the elimination of 2 of our city electric vehicles. We currently have a fleet of 4. We believe we can go down to 2 and continue to operate. We're delaying a plan to install cameras in police vehicles. Pending the purchase of a new fire truck, we believe that the fire equipment maintenance line can be reduced pretty significantly. With equipment that's over 2 decades old, that line is pretty big, and we believe that will go down with a new truck. We are proposing not fully funding the Winooski Parks District, which is a goal we've had in the past. And this one on the bottom line here that I did want to highlight is, you've heard me talk about this generally before, managers and police chiefs from around the region have been working with the Howard Center to build up what we're calling a community outreach team, which would be a team of Howard employed caseworkers who would be placed in the police departments across the region with the idea of serving people, specifically our neighbors who are in a mental health break or a substance abuse break at the lowest level, free up some public safety resources, but also get them as directly targeted to other services as possible. So for the city of Winooski, that would be an add of $12,300 that we are recommending with the leadership proposed budget. That would be $12,000 to get us almost a full-time caseworker sitting in the police department, and we really believe that's a valuable add to our community. So the implications of those last 3 slides. So if you start with the level services budget presented by staff, make all of those reductions. You just saw on the slide, we cut out the $314,000 from the budget, which is saving the average property taxpayer about $140 a year. With the leadership proposal, we are recommending adding back in $92,000 of that for a tax rate impact of 1.9%, an increase of 1.9%, for a total new cost to the average taxpayer of about $43 in FY19. And then the additional adds column, which is other priorities that we think are important but didn't quite make it to that level for us, but we wanted to have them here for you to look at. would be another 2%, if we add them all back in, another 2% increase.
Sorry, 2% plus 1.9%?
Yes.
Or
2% plus 1.9%. Yeah. So an additional $48. So this is just another way to say this, the impact to the tax rate. So with the level tax rate budget, no impact to the municipal tax rate. With the leadership proposal, a 1.9% increase, so the tax rate would be $1.0641. So what's not funded with any of these proposals is increased staffing to implement the strategic vision areas over what we have now, or any increased staff to implement the economic development strategic plan, as well as no increased investment in municipal infrastructure. The significant caveat to that is that this budget does assume, as you probably all know, we had a ballot item a number of years ago to increase the capital spending by 5% each year. So this budget proposed does include that 5% increase. So it's the baseline capital investment increase, but nothing beyond that. So I want to provide a few kind of big picture context pieces. This is probably pretty obvious to those who spend a lot of time, as some of us do, with wonky municipal budgets. But this is a big picture of a big revenue picture. So on the general fund, which is on the left, you see that 80% of our revenue comes from property taxes. Across all funds, general fund revenues are only about 50%, or non-TIF general fund revenues. Non-TIF revenues are generally, the general fund only covers 50% of them. And then we have parking fund, water and wastewater, water funds, etc. The big picture for expenditures, across all funds. So we have the largest being currently in the city, the TIF debt payments, 20% then made up of public works and police across all funds, another 8% for general government administration, 7% for community services, and you can see the expenditure dollars there associated. Big picture for the property tax bill, so this is general fund only. For those of us who have a home at the average rate of $225,000 a year, we're spending about $1,100 on police services, $525 on public works services, $380 on general administration, $350 on community services, etc. So I have included here, because we're talking all funds in, a couple of highlights from across all of the funds, and I'll kind of fly through these, but they're detailed in the budget book. So with these proposed budgets, we are not making any recommendations for changes to water rates. Those rates haven't changed recently. The water fund, with the leadership proposal, maintains current staffing levels, and with either proposal will make a contribution to fund balance. Wastewater and stormwater, again, no changes in the rate, staffing levels remain the same. We are planning a significant use of fund balance to maximize the efficiency of the Headworks project. So as you remember, that the bond vote we discussed would fully fund the actual wastewater infrastructure, but we have a proposal to do the energy efficiency work and the building work at the same time. So we're hiring one contractor to do that work rather than breaking up the project. And that would include the use of fund balance. With that use of fund balance, we still have $650,000 in reserves within the wastewater budget. TIF and the Community Development Fund. So we are making a strategic recommendation with the TIF budget to reduce our payment to ourselves in FY19 in order to meet our external debt obligations and our 1-to-1 debt service coverage ratio. We are recommending we only pay ourselves, i.e. the Community Development Fund, $150,000 out of that existing note for FY19. Doing that means that we will need to use $25,000 of operating reserves out of the Community Development Fund to fund operations in FY19. That leaves a remaining $137,000 in fund balance in that fund to strategically invest in other projects. If you remember from last year, we didn't fully budget that that $300,000 appropriation last year in order to have a balance to incentivize other projects. So that is the recommendation. It also includes, it does include funding for a new website as part of the marketing and branding initiative, and money for promotional materials. The parking fund revenues are increasing slightly to reflect actual collections. We are continuing to fund our proposals for parking management and signage as a result of the parking study. It does include an additional general fund transfer for parking enforcement and the communications coordinator as indicated on that big spreadsheet, and funds these other positions as well. So this is what the city is kind of buying with paid parking in the city. You have a community justice fund budget before you. This is informed by initial conversations with the Department of Corrections. Of course, we won't actually know the budget for that until the legislature completes their budget process. In the community services fund budget, the big difference is with the recommended budgets, it contemplates moving the child and family program manager 100% to the Thrive budget. And the use of reserves to do that. One of the things you've heard myself and Ray talk about in the last couple of months is our commitment to growing childcare capacity in the city. As a result of the Promise Communities work, we issued an RFP for a childcare provider to come in, and we did not receive any successful candidates as a result of that. So we are currently working with the Promise Community Group and the schools to think about how we might build that out with city partnership over the next year or 2 or 3. The dedication of the community and family program manager solely to the Thrive budget allows us to build the fiscal infrastructure we would need if we were going to stand up a child care center through the city that was itself an enterprise fund. So it kind of starts down that path of putting the staff associated solely into that enterprise fund. Much more to come on that. Last 2 other funds, rental registry is pretty much staying the same. We're seeing a small revenue increase as a reflection of the new housing on the market. The staffing and expenses are level funded. We do anticipate a small contribution to reserves as a result of that, and are really excited once the Housing Commission wraps up their work to think about how we use those reserves to assist property owners with maintaining quality rental housing. And then the capital improvement and equipment plan across all funds, as I said earlier, we really prioritized the acquisition of a new fire truck this year over other funded sources. The CIP is in your budget. You can see where those changed. Also prioritizing the work for the generator and the Headworks project at the wastewater treatment plant, as well as improvements to the senior center that have been planned for a couple of years. I do believe that significant attention is needed on the capital improvement plan. We have historically really underfunded, as the mayor said in his recent budget presentation, capital in the city and grown new revenue to support ongoing preventative maintenance. And if we are able to hire a new public works director, this is an area where I would ask them to focus immediately. That's it. So what's next? You saw this chart before. You will hear from all of these folks over the next couple of months, or the next month and a half. The final votes required by you, as you know, are to approve the general fund budget and the money to be raised by property taxes, approve the enterprise and special revenue funds, and if you so choose, approve placement of a bond vote for the Headworks project on the town meeting day warning. Just note, in the next couple of meetings, you will also hear a conversation about regional dispatch that could end up on the ballot as well. So I don't want to lose sight of that. So finally, I just want to say this, as I said in the beginning, thank you for being willing to try this new approach this year. I know it's a lot. It was a complete team effort from start to finish. The whole team here spent a lot of time walking through this process. And a huge shout out to Angela, who did this all with a smile while also walking us through our annual audit as well. She is a rock star. Happy to answer any questions or get feedback on more information that you would like through the budget conversations.
How'd she do, Angela?
Immediate reactions, thoughts.
I'm going to say something that's really blunt and probably going to be a little bit frustrating to hear. I'm very concerned that the process that we're asking staff to go through at this juncture, that there's not enough fat to cut out of this budget any longer. That it's a realistic lift, because as I look at what the net zero impact looks like, that's not a feasible budget to me. That's not a budget that we can operate with. It doesn't begin to I don't know, reflect what I think the values of this body has been and what we've been asking for people to do. So I just want to put that out there, because I know I was really a hard driver this year saying use the same process, it's served us well. And I do wonder if we have taken all of the soft funds out of this budget, all the wiggle that was there, to the point where there's not more blood to bleed out of that rock. I don't know how else to say that, because it's quite an exercise and it's a difficult one, and to ask folks to go through when it's that tight. So I want to put that out there, because I want us to open our minds as we go through this process about how we might even be able to tweak it a little bit more next year, and come up with a different system for council, setting some benchmarks for percentage increases in light of what the initial numbers start to look like. And I'm nowhere near evolved on that. I want to throw that out there, because that really hit me this weekend going through this budget, is that it's not like years past where there was $40,000 on something that, you know what, we can sacrifice this and cut this off. We're back to talking about, potential human reduction, and I don't know how we ask for things to keep going at the rate they're going with fewer humans. I don't know how we do that. So I'm just gonna put that emotional plea out there with no other thoughts, but to open the floor and say a big thank you to all of you for going through this. I know it's a lot of work. I know we ask you to have really tough and difficult conversations that are really challenging. So thank you for doing that.
I should also note, I should have said this at the beginning, I did this presentation also with our staff team this afternoon, so they have seen this, and we have had individual conversations with all those who are potentially affected by any of these scenarios. So hopefully we are managing those hard conversations on our end of things.
Yeah, and you can't soften that. I mean, that's what we do every year. I mean, that's why this is why we spend so much time on it and are so thoughtful about it. So we are going to see this a number of times, and I'm sure it was a lot to digest, but this is a great time to get some of those initial questions out. I think it's really effective having the enterprise fund balance, the special fund balances in the mix in this conversation. That was helpful context that, we don't always wrap our heads around as we look at it. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
I would be interested in, and I have to admit I haven't gone through all the nitty-gritty spreadsheets yet, but there are a couple points in the presentation, and as I was reading, it looks like we're funding operational costs through use of one-time money or reserves. There may be a couple instances of that. So if we could have a really clear picture of this budget relies on X amount of one-time money to fund operational expenses, that's really important for us to have a handle on.
So we can absolutely give you a summary of that. I think there are 3 key areas where we're recommending that. One is the Orion Community Center. One is the Thrive Enterprise, or Community Services Enterprise Fund Thrive budget. And one is the Community Development
Yep.
Fund, where we have a outstanding note to ourselves and know that revenue is coming in future years.
Right.
But for this year, so those are the three places, but we will give you a memo on that,
Great.
outlining those.
So, the community and economic development position has contributed an incredible amount to the city and has been really, really invaluable. One of the things we talked about with that position that I think, looking back at it, is a bit of an unrealistic ask right now, is that they start to do some parcel analysis around potential future tax growth and really working that pipeline. And I guess I would just ask, from your position, Jesse, coming in, how well you feel we have our arms wrapped around future potential growth rates, if at all, because it's hard when you see construction happening and then see grand list growth at what it is. Part of what I explained earlier this week was that in a small geographic area, we're reliant on a property going offline to put a new one online. And so we take a hit every time there's a reconstruction project. It's not like somebody's developing a field or developing a parcel that's been empty for a number of years. We're built out. So we take a property offline and then back on. And I guess maybe I'm adding something to the work plan, or if you have any input about how you felt about the way that we arrived at potential tax growth. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. So the assessor and I went back and forth a number of times on the grand list growth projections. I think we do have a pretty good handle on specifically what's included in our projections and where that growth is coming from. Quite frankly, for FY19, that's built solely on what we know, not what we're assuming is going to happen in the future, because to have FY19 grand list impact, it's got to be online in April, so that's not a far out window. We know what's under construction right now and what's not. I think so I feel pretty confident about that number. I think to your larger question of, do we have a sense of that over time?
Yeah.
I think we do have a very good sense of that. I think what we don't have a good sense of is how market factors are going to impact that. We have seen the hotel project and the Strand project and other projects along Main Street be lurking, having work done on them, but because of outside factors aren't moving as quickly as we want. I would be honest, I think I'm a little concerned at how changes at the federal level are also going to impact how we can project out over the next 5 and 10 years what that could look like. But I do think we have a good handle on a parcel by parcel basis on where we're investing our time strategically, specifically Heather and Paul's time in where we could maximize development. I think, quite honestly, that's a lot of what the Main Street project is about, how we strategically invest to get that full build out. So I do think we have a good sense of that. I also, in building this, one of the important things to keep in mind is $1 million of new development gets us $10,000 of property tax growth. Mm-hmm. So when we start thinking about why don't we have more, we're growing, we as a city are growing, we see this happening, why don't we have more natural growth coming into the city? To add one police officer, we would need one $10 million project, and we're not seeing that. We're seeing great $2, $3, $4 million projects, and that's incrementally creeping up, but it's not a big, 3 or 4 or 5% growth in 1 year. Mm-hmm. As you said, we're 1.4 square miles to see that real. We don't have enough space to see that real big growth.
So the only reasonable conclusion to meet at is to take over part of Colchester.
Start stealing property, move your fence lines back.
Suggesting to build a wall?
A wall, I'm thinking a wall.
Yeah, thanks for turning the camera mic too. I think the only other item that would be helpful for us to, and this is really on more you and me, and probably Nicole in a conversation standpoint too, is to circle back to fund balance conversations in regards to any potential one-time money that is in this budget, especially with large expenditures that are being proposed. And then you did a great memo, and I did not have time to go back and read it in regards to what caused fund balance last year. But I guess I would just, from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint, have to ask the question: do we feel like we took into account those
Factors.
Yeah, what happened to cause the fund balance from last year? I mean, vacancies were.
So there were two main drivers. Off the cuff, I can recirculate
Yeah.
that memo. Off the cuff, there were two main drivers. There was an incredible increase due to staff's diligence in collection of delinquent taxes.
Yeah.
So over $100,000 of revenue, of new revenue, but old revenues in. Our current delinquent tax level is about 10,000 outstanding. We just don't have that. We're not going to see that new revenue again.
Yep.
And then the second was vacancies, and right now, but for the public works director and one EO1, we're pretty fully staffed,
Yeah. Okay.
and nobody is allowed to leave. For the record.
So it's definitely a lot to process. I did just want to say, Seth, I appreciate your bluntness at the beginning, because having not been through this budget process last year with you all, and looking at that thought of, okay, what does a level tax rate budget look like? I can just say, as somebody who just came in March and wanting to be on this council, to be a part of these important community discussions, I really think my impetus there is, our charge is to make fiscally responsible decisions around taxpayer money while ensuring that we are funding the services that our community needs. And I am with you 100% that I don't see that in the level tax rate proposal. I think so I guess that, I appreciate you saying that really bluntly. One of the questions I have if we're looking at the leadership proposal is, are there any areas there that just kind of make your hair stand up a little bit or make you nervous for looking ahead to FY20 and being nervous of, I wish we hadn't been in the position where we had to do that, feeling like it might put us in a tricky position moving forward?
With the level tax rate or the leadership?
No, with the leadership.
The leadership.
Budget.
I am much more comfortable, and I think our leadership team as a whole is much more comfortable with the leadership budget and thinking and believing that strategically positions us a little better. I am worried about our level of capital investment. I think we need to be investing a lot more in capital on an ongoing basis. To do that, we also need a public works director. So what really makes my hair stand up about the level tax rate budget is the lack of a public works director. I think the leadership proposed budget would allow us to keep doing what we're doing now, to strategically invest in kind of the scrappy way we do in the vision that's been set by the council, and set us up well going into FY20.
Thank you.
It's 4 years out from TIF. The golden egg.
We're spending all that money already.
I was gonna say, it's all-
I do want to say, just because you brought it up, this slide to me, I feel like is also really important for us to be paying some attention to.
Yeah.
This is my job. We need to see progress in the TIF district. If we do not fully build out the TIF district soon, we are going to have a problem in the TIF budget. And what we have been able to accomplish going into FY19 with this deferred payment to ourselves is not going to work for another year. So just want to call that out.
7D. Okay. Other questions? We're going to get to talk about this for 2 more months. Anybody have any immediacy questions? And then I would just also really encourage you too, if it's not something you think that benefits the public from a conversational standpoint, to set up time with Jesse and have conversations about it.
Absolutely.
I'll certainly be circling around to everybody to have conversations about your priorities, interests, and kind of where you're at too. So more to come there. But any questions for right now?
Just only thing is, like, every year I feel like always the same thing goes through my head, that like we ask for and get a couple more percent from taxpayers, and then we end with a $500,000 surplus. So we talk about having to cut 350,000 when we're projecting 500,000 in reserves. So like, does it mean we're too conservative with our numbers, or are there so many other factors that there's just no way to dial this in anymore, or do we just need that reserve for capital? I mean, it just seems, I don't know, it's bugged me every year. And I just don't know if there's a way to like start to wrap our head around that fully when having these budget conversations, or if that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, so for the last 2 years, last year we ran 390, 379 on fund balance. Prior to that, we'd had 5 years between 79,000 and 150,000, kind of a steady run. And I'll just say that was under consistent budget management at that point in time. I think the fund balance changes, quite frankly, in some ways are reflective of just some shifts that we've had in leadership and in staffing and in work. So I wouldn't consider, I think, it's a good point. I mean, you're completely valid in asking. I think it's a good question. I do think there was a stretch of 5 years prior to the last 2 years where we were really consistent in the amounts, and it was roughly, like I said, I think about $75,000 to $150,000 band there that was hit year after year. So I guess it's all about how much value you place in the explanation about where the fund balance is coming from, and how much that is truly one time and not. And that's why I brought it up too. I get it. There's no good answer for it. It just
happened.
I throw that out there for thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions, thoughts, comments from council? I know you have lots of thoughts, but.
And I certainly would welcome the opportunity to talk with anybody about it, or if you have requests for additional information that you'd like to see over the course of these meetings, please feel free to send those in our direction. Or if any members of the public have questions as well that they would like us to unpack, now is a great time to send those in and let us do some homework.
When we get into the individual department presentations, are we going to get more detail on the actual budget lines, or is it still going to be that same roll up?
So currently our plan is to give you the roll-ups, which are all in your binder now. If you would like more detail on a specific one, we certainly can provide that.
Angela's spreadsheet.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments, concerns from council? Questions, comments, concerns from the public? Great, so hearing none, this is the first of what is going to be, like we said, 2 months of conversations. Great job, thank you. I know that is a Herculean effort on behalf of staff to get there. Thank you all, everybody, from every position. I know that takes a lot of work, and we're incredibly appreciative of the hard conversations, discussions you have to have, and we're grateful for you for doing that. Thank you. Thanks for the hard work. Okay, so with that, how quick is the CCRPC Brownfields grant? Because we have a couple guests here for another item, and I want to be really mindful and respectful of their time. Super fast? Okay. We'll stay on order for Mike's sanity. All right, approval of community services, CCRPC grant award for Brownfields.
So this is a grant pool that's been out there for a while, and I think we were sort of holding off on applying for it until we had a little bit more clarity about next steps for the preliminary engineering for the pool. Having gotten that in November, really quickly pivoted to an application. I want to give Weston and Sampson a shout out for the help in putting together the application. Went to that meeting on the 20th of November. over at RPC here in Winooski, and we were fortunately fully funded for our request. So that means $15,500 in grant funds to support the environmental and hazardous material portion of the $92,500 project that you guys approved to fund. As I mentioned in here, and this was something we knew going in, applying for these grant funds, because of additional reporting requirements that come along with that funding stream, which is a federal funding stream, Weston and Sampson, the contractor, does have to tack on an additional $3,000 to their fee for the additional service time that takes. So that brings the net impact, positive impact, to $12,500 versus $15,500, but still better than what we were at before. So as I mentioned here, that brings our total commitment to the project down to $80,000 versus $92,500. So that's that.
Questions, comments, concerns? Big thank you to our partners at CCRPC again for managing those funds, and for Weston Sampson for their assistance with that too.
And just a quick related update before action. Surveying on the property occurred the 28th and 29th with Weston and Sampson, and we've got a kickoff meeting scheduled the evening of Wednesday the 6th with the pool committee, and then the 7th with staff. So we are moving that process along at a good clip right now. So
has the fundraising committee decided to split it with us, 2.2 each? Is that what I understood? 2.2 million.
I'm not going to speak on their behalf.
Okay. Any other questions, concerns, comments from council?
Only on Ray's lack of commitment to that last comment.
Questions, concerns, comments from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the grant for this Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission Brownfields Grant Award.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. All right, item I. We have an item related to deposit agreements with Opportunities Credit Union. I assume we're going to be joined by Dr. Ticehurst. I want to also acknowledge Cheryl Fantassi, CEO and President of Opportunities too. We'll have a opportunity as well for you. Good evening, Dr. Ticehurst.
Good evening, all. It's good to see you all.
You as well.
Especially in reasonable good spirits. You have a copy of the memo that I sent you in regards to the collateralization of city funds at the Opportunities Credit Union. I won't regurgitate the memo itself. What I tried to do for you is to lay out the factors as I saw it based on the input from the auditors from the FY16 audit, which said that the excess funds at Opportunities Credit Union for the community development programs were not fully collateralized. I've tried over the course of the last 10 to 12 months to get that done. You saw from my memo I haven't reached that point yet. And so what I did was, based on that, and to offset the situation as it stands right now, I made a recommendation to you for you to consider. And of course, as the final fiduciary responsible agent for the city of Winooski, the council can make their decision based on what they want to do. I'll entertain any questions you might have at that point.
Okay. So issue that arose on our audit, and the auditors have reviewed any proposed agreements that have been circulated?
The one agreement, draft agreement that was sent to us, I reviewed it, the auditors reviewed it, as I said. The draft agreement called for a collateralization with mortgages rather than a third-party line of credit, so to speak. And the auditors made their statements that they didn't think it was necessary that we go with mortgages, that it should be more liquid rather than with mortgages. I agreed with them. The Government Finance Officers Association also had articles out relative to collateralization of public funds. They also agreed on liquidity rather than any other form of collateralization. And we bring this to your attention. It just hasn't materialized, and made a recommendation to you, and based on that you can decide what you want to do. I would suspect that Opportunities will have an opportunity to tell you what they think they should do, and then you can make a decision. it is public funds and it needs to be collateralized, and it's in excess of $300,000, so you decide.
Questions for Jim from council?
So if we were to pull it, what do we do with it? Park it in our bank account?
I'm sorry?
So if we were to pull this money from opportunities, right, that's your recommendation?
My recommendation for the interim, basically, is to offset this particular issue, is to remove the monies from Opportunities Credit Union, put it in a financial institution where it will be collateralized, where it will be protected. And then it can be easily transferred in whatever denominations we want based on the amount of loans that are given out. We can easily transfer it back to Opportunities as each loan materializes. That would be a stopgap measure. The best possible measure is for Opportunities to simply collateralize it with something that is acceptable to the city.
Okay.
Understood. Thank you.
Other questions for Dr. Dysers?
Well, if that were to be the direction that we move in, are we aware of financial institution that we would be able to house this money where it would be collateralized?
Chances are what we would do is simply put it in with our normal banking activity, which is at TD Bank North, who right now is one of the two banks that we do banking activities with. We do our main and general fund checking accounts with TD Bank North. They do collateralize with a third-party vendor, and they collateralize us up in excess of $6 million to cover our checking account. The other one that we deal with is People's United, and we have our parking meter funding sources through them, the credit card sources. Also, we have a $200,000 line, $200,000 checking account with them, and they also collateralize. Under normal conditions, banks themselves will collateralize deposits in aggregate up to $250,000. After that, it's almost kind of you're on your own, or you get somebody else to collateralize them in excess. Because the TD Bank does understand that they have a significant amount of our funds in their bank, they simply go out and get a third-party vendor to collateralize the excess funds over the $250,000 just to safeguard the city's money. And that's pretty much of a normal practice with most of the banks. I'm not that familiar with credit unions, although I've learned a lesson over the course of the last 6 months.
And so, for context too, because you weren't there for some of those loan program discussions. So we have two different loan programs set up with the credit union. One is for both were from pools of money that have very specific potential proposed use, not potential proposed uses. We have to use the money for the two purposes that they're geared towards, not necessarily in the format that they're geared toward, but we have to use it towards one as a housing fund, roughly $250,000 in that fund, and then, go ahead.
300 and some odd thousand is in the housing fund and another 250 in the small business.
There you go. So both those funds were set up and deposited. Opportunities does specialized programs that focus on community development around shared secure loans or loans that offset risk. So the funds were deposited there for that purpose to run those two loan programs. The housing one's been open since, oh good grief. Yeah, it's been a long time. And the small business one, we just negotiated and instituted. We just kind of finished it last year.
2016, the agreement was signed and we deposited the funds in May.
Okay, good. Other questions for Dr. Ticehurst on this issue? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ticehurst. Very appreciate it.
Yep.
Ms. Van Dassey, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Welcome.
Hello there, good to see you.
Good to see you again.
And we'll also say we've had a long and good working relationship with Opportunities between the city too, so we're appreciative of that relationship. So
Excellent, and hopefully we'll continue that for a long, long time in the future. I think when the problem started was, as you mentioned, we had the two different funds, and the fund that was originally used for the housing, because about 175 to 200,000 of that was lent out back in 2012 and that time frame. the total amount of the money, the rest of it fell within the $250,000 that was insured. So it was either loaned out or was in the $250,000 that was insured under the credit union insurance fund, and so it really didn't present a problem. And then when the money came in for the business lending program, I think that's when the cap when it went over the cap. So anyway, let me just tell you a little bit quickly about our background for those of you that don't know us. We were started in 1989. The city of Winooski made their first deposit with us in 1999, which was the housing fund. And we are specifically chartered to work with low-income, unbanked, and underserved populations. Our original field of membership was Burlington and Winooski, and then expanded to the state of Vermont. So about 10% of our members, around 800 of the people that we work with, come from the city of Winooski and live here. We also have additional people that are members of the credit union who work in Winooski. So that combined total is about 1,200 individuals out of 8,000 members that we have. People come to us from all walks of life, but generally they come to the credit union because they don't have another place to bank. So if you look around you, you'll see, and you may not know them by name or face, but people that came to us because they didn't understand how to manage their money. They could be well-to-do, they could be very poor, but they experienced some events in their life that caused them to not be able to be well-served by the banking community. And I come from the bank. I was with TD and Howard Bank for 23 years, so I have a great amount of respect for the banks and the credit unions. We receive support from all the banks and credit unions in the area. They all carry deposits with us, many of them significantly larger than the amounts with the city, because they support the work that we do. And that's why deposits like these from the city of Winooski are very critical to us. They help allow us to lend. We lent about $2.5 million to people in Winooski in the last 3 years. Many of those were very small loans. And when I look around, wish I could tell you the names, but because of privacy, I can't. But as I look up and down Main Street and throughout Winooski, I see bakeries and delis and stores and hairdressers and breweries and people that are long-haul truckers who all came to the credit union. They had poor credit, they didn't have a down payment, they were a startup, and the credit union was there for them. And so that's why this money historically has been with the credit union. What I do hope to do with Jim, even though it seems like it's a really, Dr. Teiser's an easy thing to do, is to try to find a way to either do a letter of credit or something that would satisfy the city. We aren't TD Bank, we're not, $12 billion. We don't have the types of assets to pledge. We don't have securities. I mean, we don't invest in securities. All of our money goes into loans. So we don't have the types of investments that you're looking for. I don't know if letter of credit is allowed. My understanding is that could serve to mitigate some of the risks that you're concerned about. Not something we could do with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston. It would probably take us about 60 days, but it's something that might satisfy and close that risk. So I don't know what else to say, but we came in 2010 to Winooski, opened up our branch across from My Web Grocer. At that point in time, you could kind of stand in the middle of the street and there were no cars and pretty much be by yourself day or night. I think we've tried to be a good steward of our corner of the block and bring businesses down to that area, bring people in. And I know the city's been really good to us when things have come up. The police department and the parking staff and everybody have been extremely supportive of us. So hopefully we can work through this and continue to have a good working relationship going forward. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work.
I'm going to leave you just some annual reports too, just some materials so you can get a little sense of who we are. Some of the businesses are probably pictured in here so you can read their stories, but I'm sure you probably know who a lot of them are anyways. So I'll just leave these with you.
Can I make one programmatic statement? I'm talking with Heather. So both of these funds that are sitting, the housing and the small business loan funds sitting with the credit union at this point, have been used minimally in the last couple of years. We've been before you a couple of times specifically around the small business loan program. We are strategically not pushing those out right now as we finalize the economic development strategic plan and understand what we're trying to actively incentivize in the city, as well as the housing commission work and what we're trying to economically incentivize. I think the funds through OCU are really pivotal to our future, our ability to give out, to do that incentivization over the next couple of years and see that balance dropping as we issue loans pretty quickly in the end of FY18 and FY19. It's not, I don't want the message to be out there that we're just sitting on these funds and not using them strategically. We are sitting on them in a strategic way as we figure out what to incentivize. And I think a lot of those people that we might be working with are already credit union customers.
And I think to that point, what we're not here tonight to talk about is we love the programs, right? That's what we've gotten behind those. We've pushed those. This body has, the public body that makes those strategic decisions. So this has nothing to do with the programs. We're trying to clean up an audit issue. And,
I understand that.
Yeah, and and I hope you do know that it's very limited to that one item. It's not about the larger relationship or, the programs overall. That's not an analysis that we're undertaking at this point in time. We rely, as you just said, on you guys to make recommendations on that and for us to implement whatever we need to do to reach those strategic goals. So that's not a discussion point. I think it's about curing an audit issue, an account issue, and hearing what the recommendation from the treasurer is on that.
Would the letter of credit be an acceptable method of?
Sure, because we get a standalone letter of credit from a third-party vendor on behalf of TD Bank, so a letter of credit. It's just that the auditors and myself did not think that, having mortgages as the collateral was the way to go. Standing letter of credit from a third-party vendor would be fine.
So in lieu of us trying to negotiate that here tonight, I am, in thinking about this coming in, given that with much respect, Dr. Ticehurst, to your time and effort and energy, is the potential of setting a timeline to say, let's give this window to resolve this issue and let opportunities with staff, Dr. Ticehurst, and communicating with our auditor on signing off on whatever resolution could be as an option. I think, as Jim stated, the goal would ultimately be to keep the money there if possible, obviously, but, again, understand that you need to take the steps that you recommended in fiduciary disclosure standpoint. That's understood. But wondered how folks might feel about that.
I'm fine about giving a window. I think we should exhaust every avenue to keep the funds at opportunities if we can.
Agreed.
Yes, sounded like 60 days was a doable timeframe. And I think we do need to have the funds collateralized.
Yeah.
That's not negotiable,
No, not for our audit.
but it sounds like this path forward would be acceptable to the auditor and the treasurer, and so 60 days is what it takes, and I can support that.
Looks like there's a pathway to the best case scenario, hopefully, so.
Okay. So this is up as a discussion item, but it's you're shaking your head. I think you've shook your head too. Sounds like we can we can do a 60-day window, and hopefully it all comes together.
We shall see.
Great. Thank you for your work, Dr. Ticehurst.
Thank you very
Jill,
much.
thank you very much for coming, and thanks for all that you do in the community.
I appreciate it, and thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, up item J, approval of Marathon Health personal property assessment.
We're gonna fly through these last three. So you heard about, at the November 6th meeting, that this Marathon Health personal property tax issue and hearing, and indicated that you would consider amended personal property tax statement from them. So we have worked with them to reissue that. It is here attached. Because of how this was done, we need your approval to accept this revised personal property tax statement and reissue the tax bill. We'd intended to put this on the consent agenda and couldn't figure out how to do it to just enable a yes vote.
Any questions or concerns? I think we did this one at length last time, but any questions or concerns? Any questions or concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for the Marathon Health personal property assessment adjustment.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Sweeney, second by Brian Corrigan. Any further discussion? Hearing seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Item K, approval of Main Street revitalization appointment of alternative authorized representatives.
So the next two items concern the state revolving loan funds for clean water and drinking water. These are the funds we have previously authorized for the Main Street revitalization project. These are very bureaucratic forms that require your signature to allow the potential funders to talk to other staff other than me. So we are requesting your authorization to put Paul Dreher, Ryan Lambert, and John Choate as authorized representatives for the city of Winooski on those grant applications for the Main Street revitalization project. I still hold ultimate sign-off. They just can communicate with the grantor.
Questions, concerns, comments? Seeing and hearing none. Questions, concerns, comments from the public? Seeing and hearing none. I entertain a motion along the lines of approval of Ryan Lambert and Paul Dreher and John Choate as authorized representatives for RF1-212-1.0, the wastewater and stormwater, and WPL 284.1.0 drinking water loan applications related to the Main Street revitalization project.
So moved.
Motion by Nicole, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Hearing seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. Item L, approval of Headworks project appointment of alternative authorized representatives.
So same request, but for Ryan Lambert and John Choate on the Clean Water Fund application for the Headworks project.
Questions or concerns from council?
No.
Questions or concerns from the public? Seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion along the lines of approval of Ryan Lambert and John Choate as authorized representatives for RF1-213-1.0, the Clean Water Fund loan application related to the Headworks project.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Nicole. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Next up on tonight's agenda is a proposed executive session related to potential pending litigation, and specifically of UMB Bank N.A. versus the city of Winooski. Executive session is proposed under state statute to protect the city's right to negotiate, or to engage with our attorney in a confidential way, and also an executive session, because doing so in public could potentially harm the city legally, and could expose the city to additional legal action, and put us at a substantial disadvantage. We will not be making any decisions in executive session this evening, so executive session will be solely for the point of discussion only, again, and strictly focused on the item listed under the pending litigation heading of the City Council agenda. City Council will not come out of the meeting to make any sort of formal decision. We will reconvene only to adjourn. So Council's regular proceedings will be wrapped up. No decision will be made. We'll come out only to adjourn. No further discussion on the issue. Any questions, concerns from Council? Any questions or concerns from the public? Seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion for entry into executive session, bringing Jesse Baker and also the city's legal counsel on this, Ms. Catherine Dingle.
So moved.
Second. Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Brian Sweeney. Further discussion? Hearing seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. We now enter an executive session. Again, we will return only to adjourn.